Oh, yo, what's up, Ivers? Happy 3-Tune Tuesday, everybody. Hope everybody's good on this, what's today's date? Tuesday, May 13th. We will be continuing our three-part series, part 3 out of 3 of the SoCal 80s punk scene. We got one band today that their only album actually came out in 79. Most of those bands started in like 77, 78. And then a lot of first albums came out in 80, 81. The Descendants' first album, 82. We covered The Descendants, Social Distortion, and Black Flag week 1. Last week, week 2, we covered The Circle Jerks, The Adolescents, and Agent Orange. And a lot of these bands only had one record either out in like 80, 81, 82. So yeah, it's just kind of this quick, and a lot of them became iconic, which is kind of interesting because I think it took a few years later to kind of become that iconic. All right, let's see. What are we getting into first? All right, we're going to go with the band Fear. Now, they actually had a few albums, similarly to the Descendants, Black Flag, the Circle Jerks. This song is called More Beer, and it's from the album More Beer, 1985, from the band Fear. Fear famously played Saturday Night Live, which had to be so crazy at the time because they were not like a big famous band. So that's pretty interesting. And that's the first pick is the band Fear. You'll hear Dave Grohl talk about Fear a lot, how they were one of his favorite bands. Next up, speaking of Dave Grohl and, that whole clique, we have Pat Smear, the current guitarist for the Foo Fighters. He was also the second guitarist toward the end of Nirvana. He was an official member, The next record, he would have been, in the photographs. They would have been a 4-piece. Unfortunately, that did not happen because of Kurt Cobain's untimely suicide. And unfortunately, the Germs ended the same way. Total bummer. But their one and only album came out in 1979. And hold on here. That album was called G.I. from the band The Germs. And let's see, what song do I want to go with? I'm going to go with Lexicon Devil. Probably their most known track, to be honest. Just a classic punk tune. Again, all these bands are from the LA area. Some are from, the beach town. Some are from, downtown LA. All these bands are within an hour drive from LA. It was just so interesting how this scene happened. Some of the bands went on, to do bigger things. And all these bands influenced stuff that was huge in the 90s. The Descendants were like the band that influenced Blink-182 and that kind of really poppy, kind of so-called punk from the 90s. Fear is one of Dave Grohl's favorite bands. And, the Germs influencing Nirvana and all that stuff. Obviously, these guys influenced The Offspring, Green Day, all the 90s skate punk, that 2000s, late 90s, really poppy mall punk. And it's just kind of like every scene, the first bands that are there. And this was a separate thing. You had the CBGB's thing with the Ramones, you had London with the Sex Pistols. This was really like, even though it was it was only a couple years later when these albums came out, and only like a year later when these kids, excuse me, when these kids that started these bands, picked up guitars. It was really only a year or two after the first Ramones record, the Sex Pistols record, because that was 76. Obviously, those bands were playing in 74, 75. But anyway, we're going to go I was kind of deciding which one here was going to be our third pick and what was going to be a bonus jam. We're going to go with TSOL, who kind of became a more of a gothy death rock band, but they started out a punk band. We're going to go with their 82 record. I believe it's their first record. My notes here are a little scrambled because I had picked out more than one or two bands. More than three bands, rather. I had kind of picked out like 5 bands, and I did not think it was worth doing an extra week, just to fit some in. Let's see, TSOL, who was from Huntington Beach, California. Our first 2 bands were from just LA. Let's see here. Compilations, singles, EPs, albums. So this is their second album, 1982's Beneath the Shadows. And I think I'm doing the song Wash Away. I'm 90% sure. If I change it, you'll see it below. Yeah, Washed Away. That's the song I'm going to do, Wash Away. And those are our 3 picks. Now, for Bonus Jam, the last 2 weeks, I brought you some tunes from bands we had already covered. But since I'm going to wrap it up this week, we're going to go with the Dead Kennedys, who are the one band out of these 9 or 10 bands who's not from the LA area. They were from San Francisco, a couple hours further north. Really, when you look back, they're just all California bands. But it was kind of a different scene. The LA thing was definitely different than the San Francisco thing. I think the Dead Kennedys are really the only iconic punk band from the early 80s who came out of San Francisco. And obviously they drove down and they played shows together. But yeah, I'm going to throw in the Dead Kennedys as a bonus jam. There's some other great bands that put out punk rock in the 80s. There's Bad Religion. But that really was kind of more the late 80s, and it was kind of like the next wave of bands, in my opinion. So I'm going to bring you the Dead Kennedys, the song Uber Allies from their 1980 record, Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables. And that's it. I'll bring you something different next week. Again, go back 2 weeks. Check out The Descendants, Social Distortion, Black Flag. Week 2, Circle Jerks, The Adolescents, and Agent Orange. This week, the band Fear, the band TSOL, and The Germs was our second pick, and the Dead Kennedys as a bonus. And that's the California scene. That's kind of really where that second wave of punk, came from. And it's really interesting how a lot of these bands, the Adolescents, the Germs, only Agent Orange, only had one album. And they kind of just became iconic years later. Social Distortion ended up coming back 5 years later with more of a Johnny Cash kind of vibe. So they're a band that stood the test of time. The Descendants broke up in the late 80s, but they started touring again. And, they're known as like one of the most influential punk bands. It's an interesting scene, to say the least. But enjoy the tunes, and I love you guys. Later.